Streaming live across the country, tackling the topics everyone is talking about online. Share, engage, and interact. This is Newsfeed Now.
Good Thursday. Welcome into Newsfeed Now. I am Aaron Nolan. If you're new to our show, what our show is all about is we're on digital media only. So we're on this website. You can watch us on our app, on the website, your phone, your tablet, your computer. And we're looking at the top trending stories that are creating buzz right now all across the nation, from Washington, D.C. to Minneapolis, Minnesota, Los Angeles, California. Many Americans are searching for answers amidst an uncertain time in our country's history. Politicians have been looking for ways to bridge the gap from person to person. Protesters are asking for change. President Trump and the White House are looking at ways to reform. But recently, the president rejected efforts to rename U.S. military bases that are named after Confederate commanders. Camila Bernal has the latest.
President Trump is standing firm, opposing efforts to rename American military bases named after Confederate commanders, tweeting, "My administration will not even consider the renaming of these magnificent and fabled military installations."
And to suggest that these forts were somehow inherently racist and their names need to be changed is a complete disrespect to the men and women who the last bit of American land they saw before they went overseas and lost their lives were these forts.
But across America, protesters are calling for the removal of controversial statues.
But we are fighting this state about statues, in a statue in the Capitol that rings racism in the head of the Klan.
NASCAR is now banning Confederate flags. Cops has been canceled, and HBO Max has pulled Gone with the Wind from its streaming service.
I think the movie does have its place in history, but it definitely is a problematic movie in a lot of ways.
Now, at least 12 cities and municipalities across America are banning chokeholds in policing, and the White House is completing final edits on police reform proposals.
My guess is if it's a reasonable reform, that he'll sign off on it. What I want to do is give him something that's bipartisan.
I'm Camila Bernal reporting.
All right, on the East Coast, one person was hurt as protesters took down pieces of a Confederate statue in Virginia. This was the scene last night. Protesters, frustrated by the city council's decision, put off moving the monument. Demonstrators took the head off. You see it there. 4 Confederate statues before pulling one down using a rope. Now, that injury happened as the statue fell, hitting a person on the head. As for law enforcement, reports show police watched as the demonstrators did this, leaving many asking why not intervene when things got out of hand. Here's what the chief of police said.
Never at a time told not to step in when people were vandalizing or disrupting property.
Yes.
They were never not told.
No. They were told at the time before I came on scene by another elected official.
Not to step in.
That no arrest will be made.
But isn't it against the rule for the elected official to direct anything that is the police chief's purview?
It is, and until that was cleared up, because there was misinformation given that it was down through other elected officials, that was actually the call that was made. So I had to make some calls to find out exactly where that order or was coming from. By that time, they were already engaging in the property damage.
First area of the historic downtown and move it to a cemetery just on the outskirts of town in the mindset that people would have to seek out to go see it, and it wouldn't be an unwelcome sight. It could be something only people looking to brush up on history would have to go see. However, there was a challenge to who actually owns that land. And also, quite frankly, the will of City Council wasn't all on the side of moving it. And the NAACP believes there were delay tactics. There was also some nuances in Virginia law. Was the city allowed to move the monument? And what really led up to last night's frustration is that while the city council did say, yes, let's start the process to move it under new state law, last year, the state attorney general issued an opinion that if a municipality decided to more or less go outside of the law and move a monument, the state would not move in to prosecute the case, would not help litigate the case. So the protesters said that was reason enough that they did not have to wait for the new law to go into effect on July 1st. They could start moving it now, and that is what led to last night's demonstration that unfortunately turned somewhat tragic with life-threatening injuries to the protester. Once the
Brett, I want to know, as you watched this last night, how long did all of this take place? How long did the statue demonstrations, did bringing those statues take? And then secondly, what has been the response of folks in that area to what they saw, the video that you were able to get? What's been that response this morning on your station's Facebook pages?
Well, so the demonstration yesterday, the protesters were at the monument all day, and there was a series of events that led up to it. But the actual destruction of the monument, I believe that's the question you're zeroing in on, the beheading of the 4 Confederate soldiers that were on each side of the monument, that occurred in about an hour's time, just after 8 o'clock. Now, the reaction, there was a lot of reaction last night down at the monument. There were several counter-protesters showing up saying they are in favor, or they have no problem with the movement of the monument, but they don't understand the defacing and they do not understand the destruction. Lots of anger this morning that the police did not step in once destruction of property started to occur. The police chief, as you heard some there, was saying she did not have the resources in place to safely do that when the destruction of property started. She said resources were getting into place, and I can confirm that around the other side of the building, right when the injury happened, several pickup trucks full of police and riot gear were staging. So there was about to be an intervention, but the tragic injury occurred before that.
All right. Thanks so much, Fred. Appreciate you taking the time here on Newsfeed Now out of Virginia. Turning over to Texas, the Lone Star State. A small town mayor is making waves on social media after saying the Black Lives Matter movement is, quote, a threat to our lives. The post got attention from around the nation. Here's more.
I started getting screenshots from citizens, and I started looking at it, and I was like, oh, my God.
And I believe her to be a bright and capable person. So this really came as a surprise to me.
Difficulties with that story. We were working to bring Tahara in here from Austin, Texas, live. So as soon as we get Tahara on the phone, she'll kind of walk us through exactly what that story was all about. But again, these interesting things happening really all across the state. Opinions vary. I want to take a real quick look at NASCAR and what has happened in NASCAR. We brought it up in the very first story today that yesterday, late in the day, NASCAR said that they were removing the Confederate flag from all races and racetracks. This after Bubba Wallace, who is an African-American driver, the only one on that circuit, a part of NASCAR, was driving the Black Lives Matter vehicle. It had a Black Lives Matter on the hood, on the top of the car, on the hood itself. It actually had 2 hands grabbing together, one black, one white, to show unity. He ended up finishing 11th in that race. An interview with him today on the Today Show, he talked all about that, and he said he welcomes anybody to come figure out their crazy sport. So definitely things interesting happening. So on this show, we talk about the stories that are buzzing on social media. This one literally buzzes. Let's go to Memphis, Tennessee, where a removal of a massive beehive is making rounds on the internet. Here's our friend Shay Arthur.
He's known as the Bartlett Bee Whisperer.
That's roughly 4 feet of comb.
Today we caught up with David Glover at a bee rescue and removal at a Germantown home. But it's a hive removal he did last week that has the internet buzzing. A Facebook post with more than 120,000 shares. People fascinated by what they saw. Glover initially thought he would be removing about 8 feet of comb from a historic house set to be remodeled in Whiteville. That's about an hour outside of Memphis. The heat map looked promising. Then the removal started.
This is huge. This is the biggie.
This is the big one.
In all, about 30 feet of combs.
That's 30 linear feet, plus the 15 inches between the studs.
It's the biggest Glover has removed in his 11 years on the job. He believes the bees, all 35 to 40,000, had been at the home for 50 years. The bees, including the important queen, were safely taken to a local farm.
We've got white honeycomb in here, which goes up to thick honeycomb up here, and over on the right, we've got a ton of bees hiding from us.
Glover, who documents his various bee removals, says it's important to understand how crucial bees are to the environment.
They are very important to not just our ecosystem, because we like honey, but for agriculture. In 2018, that was worth about $29 billion of added agriculture just from the pollination services. So it's very important that these bees that are in people's houses get put back out on farms.
Shay Arthur, WREG, News Channel 3.
Shay, thank you so much. Interesting stuff there. We're going to go backwards now and talk to Tahara from Austin, Texas. Tahara, your story was not able to run. We had some technical difficulties. Kind of walk us through what's happening as that mayor in that small town has said that the Black Lives Matter movement, quote, is a threat to our lives.
Yeah, actually.
All right, more technical difficulties there as she has. Tahara, you have frozen up on us. If you are on Wi-Fi, sometimes if you switch off of Wi-Fi, it helps out. Let's see if that works real quick. All right, Tahara, can you hear me?
Are we good?
All right, I believe so. Let's try it again. Tell us about this small town mayor in Texas.
Sure, yeah. So this is a very small town, about 2,000, even less than that, people. And since these posts came out, since the story aired, there have been protests in that small town, basically calling for the mayor's resignation. Actually, at least 2 city council members are backing those calls for her resignation. At this point, it doesn't look like she is going to do that, but the 2 city council members I spoke with said if it comes to a vote, they will vote her out.
What are the people of the community saying? Obviously, there's some there's some infighting there between city council members, but what are folks in the community saying?
A lot of them, dozens, I would say, are very upset, and it's actually hitting beyond those city limits. It's going to nearby towns, the town of Wimberley. A bunch of people showed up to that protest in front of Wood Creek City Council meeting last night from Wimberley, as well as other neighboring areas. So it's got a lot of people up in arms, and one woman told me that maybe a few years ago you could make a comment like that and it could fly, not anymore, not these days.
Tahara, good stuff. Thanks for taking the time out of Austin, Texas. Turning to southern Louisiana, when the rain falls hard and the streets flood in New Orleans, everyone's life is rearranged. But one man got in his boat and helped a lady he never met, rescuing her from high waters. The 2 lives are now forever connected. Here's our buddy Bill Wood.
When the weather gets bad, it's good to know a guy with a canoe. A guy like Dan Crowley, who came to the rescue of a New Orleans lady he never knew until his street flooded.
Just out there in the boat and took her for a boat ride. You know, we just chatted. She was from the country, she said. I'm from the city.
The lady he lifted up into his lift of a boat.
And I started walking through the water.
He now knows is Natasha Godin.
He picks me up in the boat, paddles me onto the house. I was so excited.
In water that got knee deep, Natasha was walking, well, trying to walk, to get an important paper notarized at the home of a lawyer, one of Dan's neighbors. You never saw her before, and you may never see her again.
I gave her a ride, we said our goodbyes, and that was it.
Heaven dropped out of nowhere. I'm like, there's this guy on the side of the road with the boat.
Oh, I don't know about that, man. I think it's just a random act of kindness. Much easier to be nice than not. It was just a lady that needed help, and I was able to help her.
Stormy weather is the worst, until the best comes along in a canoe.
Heaven sent. He dropped out of the sky. The perfect scenario in a perfect storm.
All right, let's go down to Bill Wood. Tell us a little bit more about this story, Bill, live from New Orleans. Obviously, friendships sometimes can be spawned from the most unlikely places.
You are right, my buddy Aaron. This one dropped out of the sky, as Natasha said. She was trying to get to an attorney's house to get some important paperwork notarized. She was actually in a car with her brother. They had a flat tire. Streets were flooded. She was stuck in point A, and she knew she needed to get to point B. So what do? You get out of the car and you start walking. So as she started walking, here comes Dan, a guy she'd never seen before. As I said, when the streets are flooded, when the sky opens up, when the weather is at its worst and you need a lift, you are lucky if you find a guy like Dan with a canoe willing to help out.
Does Dan just play canoe taxi around his neighborhood?
You know, he and his kid, his son, Dan Michael, they have several canoes. So they were out when your street is flooded, and it happens here in New Orleans. You get out in your canoe, you get out in whatever you have, and go boating around the neighborhood. And that's what he was doing. They saw her, never seen her before, and as she said, it was as if heaven sent, it was as if God sent her Dan and his canoe to rescue her, which, by the way, she got to the destination. She got her paper notarized.
That's what it's all about. Any idea if this unlikely friendship is going to continue?
You know, I don't know. As Dan said, and I think this is like a Hollywood-written line that he said, I gave her a ride, we said our goodbyes, and that was it. They may. And if you wonder what the paperwork was that was so important that Natasha was willing to wade through, sometimes I do have those good questions, right? Sometimes when she was wading through knee-deep water down a street in New Orleans, it was paperwork. She has a company, and they're making a bid to do some business with the city of New Orleans. It had to be notarized. The deadline was noon yesterday. She got the paperwork in. It has to do with feeding people in New Orleans. So maybe she and Dan could do lunch. What do you think?
All right, Bill Wood, thanks so much out of New Orleans. Appreciate the story. Very cool. Hey, before we go, I was a big fan of Bill and Ted's, both of them, 1 and 2. But now this is number 3, and Bill and Ted are considerably older. This trailer was released today, and I thought it could have been watching the trailer. Most likely, I would never watch this movie. It's like Dumb and Dumber. I tried to watch that one, and I couldn't. And I like Keanu Reeves. I mean, that's great and all. But this one, whether it's awesome or not, excellent. I don't know if I can watch it. It just looked bad. It's due in movies August 21st. That's our show. See you tomorrow.